Introduced. The House comes to questions for oral answer. Question number 1, in the name of Chris Bishop.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. What reports has he received about lower than expected inflation in New Zealand?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, Statistics New Zealand last week released the Consumer Price Index for the March quarter. It showed that the CPI fell by 0.3% in that quarter, following on a fall of 0.2% in the previous quarter, which means that on an annual basis, consumer prices increased by 0.1% in the year to March. As an example of how quickly things change, as recently as December, Treasury was forecasting that annual inflation to March would be 1.3%. At the same time, though, as we are seeing low inflation, in fact very low inflation, which is usually associated with low growth in the economy, we are in fact seeing solid real economic growth. Latest figures from Statistics New Zealand show the economy grew 3.5% in the last year, among the fastest in the developed world.
Question.
Supplementary question, Chris Bishop.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What is contributing to lowering inflation?
Well, Mr Speaker,
Bill English.
as I pointed out, usually you'd expect low inflation associated with a slower growing economy, but that is not the case. By far the biggest contributor was the fall in the price of petrol that fell by 11% in the March quarter. We're not the only country with low inflation. The fact that the tradable sector saw prices reduced by 2.8% over the last year, that is, inflation in our tradable sector was minus 2.8%, shows that we are effectively importing low inflation. This is proving to be good for households because it enables our family budgets to go further. It also is a promising signal for businesses who want to invest because it signals that interest rates will be lower for longer. And this is one of the factors that's underpinning good levels of confidence among our households and businesses.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Chris Bishop.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What are the impacts of lower than expected inflation on the New Zealand economy?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, they're almost in every respect positive. It is an unusual position we have where solid economic growth is combined with very low inflation. The combination of the two means it's more likely that unemployment will keep falling, and it's more likely that we'll be able to sustain ongoing real growth in wages. Lower than expected inflation also suggests there's a bit more capacity in the economy to grow moderately for longer than we might have previously expected.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Order. Supplementary question, Chris Bishop.
What are the implications of lower than expected inflation?
Order. Would the member please start his question again?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What are the implications of lower than expected inflation on government revenue?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, while low inflation is helpful for businesses and households, it makes the job of reaching surplus a bit more difficult. Very low inflation means, for instance, prices are lower and less GST is collected. It also means that nominal wage increases are a bit lower, so less tax is paid on them. We'll see what effect it is going to have on government surpluses when the Treasury publishes its latest forecasts through the budget, but lower inflation is going to make it less likely that New Zealand will reach surplus for the 2014-15 year. Regardless of whether that number ends up a bit over or a bit under, we've achieved a significant turnaround from very large deficits.
Order. Supplementary question, Fletcher Tabuto.
This supposedly wonderful low inflation rate, lower consumer spending and subsequent lower GST revenue. In this context, can the Minister explain to New Zealand households why the government is continuing to manage a worsening debt burden, and this is supposedly a good thing?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, New Zealand's debt burden has continued to grow while we've been running deficits, and the point of that has been to assist the rebuild of Christchurch, which is heading for a total cost of $16 billion in contribution from the government, as well as to maintain entitlements when the government has less revenue than the expenditure commitments that it's made. However, we're satisfied we are on track to balance our books and to begin repaying that debt.
Question number 2, Honourable Annette King.
Thank you, Mr